Good.
Great.
Thank you. I was only recapping, luckily. So now we're picking up to verse 18, and we're going to be reintroduced to Jethro, who we met for a really quick second very early in Exodus. You probably know him and remember. There was a little talk of Moses's, remember Moses's wife? Oh yeah, wife and kids. Where did they go? We're going to kind of get back into that story, but at a bigger bird's eye view, we're now in the second part of two parts of Exodus. Part one was all about the Exodus itself, which is an event, but it's also the name of the book, and it's also, part of tradition. The wilderness is really three things at once. It is also an event, is one way to think of it. The actual act of going into the wilderness is an event. It's also a motif. The idea of, again, think of this, I use these words like modus operandi, motif, because they're kind of musical. So a motif would be like a piece of music you hear again and again. So something that kind of resonates, a theme, for example. Let me give you an example of a motif for the wilderness. Abraham went to the wilderness. Hagar, who gave birth to Abraham's illegitimate child, that happened first. That happened in the wilderness. We've already been prepared like a symphony, an orchestra, orchestral preparation, that when you go into the wilderness, and Moses himself has already gone into the wilderness a couple of times, that's where you encounter God. So one thing to kind of think about from a broader view is that as we're in this, it looks like a slog, chapter 16 to 40, but we're in this wilderness and seeing how it deals with the motif of being in the wilderness is really important. So that leads me to the third thing, which is tradition. So the tradition of being in the wilderness is something we actually really can identify with as Christians, because that's the, not only do we talk about it in our daily life, like would say I'm in the wilderness and we kind of mean something spiritual level, but we practice it in our liturgical life when we go through Lent. That Lent is a form of the wilderness for us, when and all the origins of fasting and all of those things that we do come from this, really. The people are wandering around hungry. You can take a kind of a dotted line down to us today doing Lent, going, I'm withholding such and such, from diet or fasting or something else, something more metaphorical. So those are three things. So the wilderness is an event, it's a motif, and it's a tradition. And it's primarily going to be focused on how this community is formed, and then how they lay out a set of rules and governance for a community. And that will continue in future books of the Torah too. Okay, let me just pause there and see if there's any questions or comments, observations.
So remind me again, how do we know Jethro?
Jethro is Moses's father-in-law from earlier in the book, but the writers, the tradition, remember we were talking about the source traditions a few weeks ago, they felt it not necessary to go into much detail back then, but now we're dealing with a new tradition that's going to spend some more time on Jethro, and maybe we get a backstory a little bit. We'll see here. Okay,
I wanted to say that it's also for us a metaphor.
Yes. Oh, very much so. You could talk about not to just go straight there, but depression is a wilderness. Infertility is a wilderness. Drought, you name it. I mean, all of these things can be felt on a spiritual level. You're absolutely right, Mary. And the metaphor of wilderness, I don't know if it gives us comfort, but it gives us a feeling of an empathy that maybe is not specific, that others know what we're going through, that you're not alone in the wilderness, because Jesus went in the wilderness. I hope that gives me comfort, I guess. So. All right, so we're on Exodus chapter 18, and I'm going to be reading about the first half of it, and I'm in the New Revised Standard Version, which again is the version you hear in church, in the Episcopal Church on Sundays, okay? Weekends, I should say. Jethro, the priest of Midian, Moses' father-in-law, heard of all that God had done for Moses and for his people Israel, how the Lord had brought Israel out of Egypt. After Moses had sent away his wife Zipporah, His father-in-law Jethro took her back along with her 2 sons. The name of the one was Gershom, for he said, quote, I have been an alien in a foreign land. And I see a footnote that says comes from the Hebrew word ger, G-E-R. We'll come back to that. Sorry. Verse 4, and the name of the other is Eliezer, or Eliezer. I never know how to say it. For he said, the God of my father was my help and delivered me from the sword of Pharaoh. Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, came into the wilderness where Moses was encamped at the mountain of God, bringing Moses' son and wife to him. Thank you, Jethro. He sent word to Moses, I, your father-in-law Jethro, am coming to you with your wife and her 2 sons. Moses went out to meet his father-in-law. He bowed down and kissed him. Each asked after the other's welfare. In other words, they said, how are you doing? And they went into the tent. Then Moses told his father-in-law all that the Lord had done to Pharaoh and to Egyptians for Israel's sake, all the hardship that had beset them on the way, and how the Lord had delivered them. Jethro rejoiced for all the good that the Lord had done to Israel in delivering them from the Egyptians. Jethro said, blessed be the Lord, who has delivered you from the Egyptians and from Pharaoh. Now I know that the Lord is greater than all gods, because he delivered the people from the Egyptians when they dealt arrogantly with them. And Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, brought a burnt offering and sacrifices to God. And Aaron came with all the elders of Israel to eat bread with Moses' father-in-law in the presence of God. All right, let me take a quick time out and just let me try to give you a modern translation a little bit. In the last part there, let's pretend they're worshiping Episcopalians and Jethro is a priest. So it's like I showed up at a Bible study and you hadn't seen me in a while, and I was like, you know what we should do, guys? Let's have communion. And that's kind of what they're doing. There's one way to think of it is it's their version of what would eventually become our Eucharist. So a burnt offering and sacrifices to God later becomes bread and wine. And they even say they're eating bread there. And probably not manna, which is not quite bread. They call it bread, but it's not quite. It's like a lavash, like a thin pita. And that's what they would be eating. What else? Okay, let's look at these names. So back in verse 3, we got Moses' sons, and I know everyone's wondering, what's going on with Moses, with Zipporah and the 2 sons? Like, where have they been through all of this? And it's a good question. It's a really good question. Gershom, presumably Jethro's been watching over them on behalf of Moses. So almost like Moses has been on a long hunting season. And Gershom, the word alien, I have been an alien, ger, is roughly where we get, it's kind of the same where we get Gentile, if I'm not mistaken. Or maybe that's Greek.
Yeah.
I think that's Greek, never mind. But there's a Hebrew word that it just suddenly escaped me that has ger as or maybe like the word Germanic. No, that's not right. But there's some kind of derivation of the Gershom. So that ger means alien in Hebrew, like foreign, not outer space. Eliezer, you probably might recognize if somebody said, please tell me what this means, you probably already know that El or Eli means God. So when that comes up in actual Hebrew, even though we're not even looking at Hebrew. So it's something to do with God. And then of course the translation is the God of my father was my help. And God of my father, I think, is what Eliezer means. My God. Ezer means help. E-Z-E-R, help. God of my help. Even more interesting. Okay, any questions, anybody? Any comments?
It says that sent away means that they were divorced.
No, not divorced.
That's what it says here.
Does it say divorce?
It says a term for divorce. Maybe it doesn't mean.
Oh, really?
Maybe sent away.
Oh, that's
What?
funny.
Other than divorce.
Interesting.
I think I have the same Bible as you.
Sent away in Deuteronomy is used as a term for divorce. You're absolutely right.
So I thought that was.
That's interesting. So this was a reunion of sorts. Yeah, I always thought of it as like a extended separation. Like a not an open marriage, but like, yeah, exactly. Yeah, but some time away. But you're right. In Deuteronomy 24, this is in our notes. And so a later book of the Torah, that same phrase "sent away" from verse 2 is also used to describe divorce. Fascinating. Good catch.
It's
Is there
another
a question?
metaphor.
It
It's another
is.
metaphor too.
It is. It is. It's just, it's rife with metaphor. Great. Well, let's keep moving. Right. Now, verse 13. Well, anyway, I also wanted to say, I'm sorry. How conditioned are we, especially those of us that read Genesis together, when you have these encounters with family members that haven't seen each other in a while, there's usually some kind of threat involved. So I'm thinking of Esau and Jacob and the twins that were kind of at battle, and there was all this tension in the room, but we forget we've come to learn who Moses is. So hopefully there's no dread here. For a second I was like, I can't remember what happens, but then I was like, right, this is Moses. This is a good guy. He's not a trickster. So he's said it a million times. I don't do tricks. I don't speak. Right. Moses is, what you see is what you get, and he's very deferential to his father-in-law and probably grateful to see his wife and sons again. Okay. Verse 13. The next day Moses sat as a judge for the people, while the people stood around him from morning until evening. When Moses' father-in-law saw all that he was doing for the people, he said, "What is this that you are doing for the people? Why do you sit alone while all the people stand around you from morning till evening?" Moses said to his father-in-law, "Because the people come to me to inquire of God. When they have a dispute, they come to me, and I decide between one person and another, and I make known to them the statutes and instructions of God." Moses' father-in-law said to him, "What you are doing is not good. You will surely wear yourself out, both you and these people with you, for the task is too heavy for you. You cannot do it alone." Remember, Jethro is a priest. He's not coming out of nowhere. "Now listen to me. I will give you counsel, and God be with you. You should represent the people before God, and you should bring their cases before God. Teach them the statutes." Think of that. There's a great psalm that says, teach me your statutes." Teach them the statutes and instructions, and make known to them the way they are to go and the things they are to do. You should also look for able men among the people, men who fear God. In other words, men who are humble. That's another way to translate that. Are trustworthy and hate dishonest gain. Set such men over them as officers over thousands, hundreds, fifties, and tens. Let them sit as judges for the people at a time. Let them bring every important case to you, but decide every minor case themselves. So it will be easier for you, and they will bear the burden with you. If you do this, and God so commands you, then you will be able to endure, and all these people will go to their home in peace. So Moses listened to his father-in-law and did all that he had said. Moses chose able men from all Israel and appointed them as heads over the people, as officers over thousands, hundreds, fifties, and tens. And they judged the people at all times. Hard cases they brought to Moses, but any minor case they decided themselves. And then Moses let his father-in-law depart, and he went off to his own country. Okay, so what do you think broadly, kind of what just happened there? Or maybe this whole chapter? That should be the end of the chapter, yeah.
I just felt that this is the beginning of the time of the judges. When
Yeah.
there's another book back here, it's called Judges, and I never really realized that it started that early on. It seemed like it happened once they got into the land, but
Exactly.
but it actually started here before that.
And Leslie, you and David might be better at explaining it, but I'm a little foggy on Judges. But if memory serves from seminary, the Judges is actually, it's not what we think of as a modern judge. So even that first sentence I was reading, Moses sat as a judge, I was going, what? Moses sort of explained what he was doing, and then Jethro kind of tweaked it a little bit. But a judge is more like an interpreter of God. So somebody that kind of mediates, like, yeah, that is like a judge, but mediates basically like, here's what God wants of you, and not the person themselves is judging. So I guess maybe, and ultimately that's what a judge ought to be, is they're saying, here's what the Constitution says, or here's what civic laws say. But it's more, think of judges more as an interpreter and less of somebody that's going around making assessments of people. Does that make sense? I hope.
Does it have the overtone of a seer?
Yeah, there's a little bit more of that. It's not a prophet whose job literally is to be the voice of God. So Moses is more of a prophet in that sense. Well, yeah, he's a prophet. It's a little. I think if we were going to get to the Book of Judges, it might explain it better. But I'm foggy on that. It's foggy in a lot of things. Yeah, basically what's happening here is, well, the first thing is Jethro didn't just happen to show up. This is God working through the situation, I would say, and it's never said explicitly, but that's clearly what's happening. Is it's not just a chance encounter. This is, Jethro has come there and has served a purpose, which is to kind of reorient Moses, kind of course correct a little bit, give him some instruction, and then his job is done, and he's gone. Don't get hung up that he said what you're doing is not good. It's more that he was saying you're out of care and concern. This is a loving, supportive family, even though there's a divorce. They are saying there's a way through this through God, and it's got to be. This is the second point I was going to make. This is done by community. Nobody goes it alone. So Moses, you can't do everything by yourself, and you have to delegate. And it's going to be a big operation. We're talking thousands of people, and there has to be a hierarchy and an organization. And never is Jethro saying, "I'm not severing the relationship between you and God." He's the priest, and you'd think he would say, "Let me talk to God, and then I'll tell you what to do." That's not it at all. He just gave Moses some kind of organizing principles for a society, I think is one way to say it. And then you get verse 24 and 27, which you're probably getting used to by this point, that these chapters tend to end with either the same source or a different source, adding kind of summary text. I don't have my sources revealed book with me, but I would venture to guess that this has more to do with how the Hebrew sounds in worship, so that some things are repeated, almost sing-songy, so that when you get a phrase like, so Moses listened to his father and did all he said. Moses, verse 25, Moses chose able men from all Israel, and he appointed them as heads over the people, as officers over thousands, hundreds, fifties, and tens. I would suspect that in Hebrew, that has a certain rhythm to it, maybe even rhymes, and it matches the phrase that Jethro said about 10 lines earlier, a little less than 10 lines.
Yeah, these are almost like military ranks.
Right.
They had just come out of a situation where they were basically formed into companies and kind of a military organization. And then often in the Middle East, these people of military ranks were also assigned judicial responsibilities. So this is kind of a model of that.
Exactly right. And this is teeing up, a really cataclysmic moment coming up, which is the, now that they kind of got how to run a militaristic society, and they've got to be militaristic because of what they've encountered with Pharaoh and all that. Like, you've got to have defenses. So, and that's just the time period in which this was written. I mean, it was wartime. It was every tribe for themselves. And this is Israel's story. So that's one thing. But what we're headed towards is we need a covenant. We need a list of rules. Just like you do sometimes in meetings, sometimes in churches. We're not going to talk over each other. We're not going to gossip about each other. Whatever the rules are when you do those kind of covenants, sometimes as practice, this society needs rules, and that's how the 10 Commandments are going to come to be. So,
I think also.
Oh, go ahead, David.
I was just going to suggest that although Jethro recognizes Yahweh, and he even sacrifices to him, he doesn't convert to Yahweh. He doesn't, abandon his former priestly duties as a priest of Midian, but it was acceptable at that time for non-Hebrews to worship their own gods, as long as they recognized that the Almighty God, the chief God, was Yahweh.
That's a good point. I didn't even think about that this is a real act of humility on Jethro's part too, do that kind of, like I said, a communion scene almost. Yeah. And again, that's, just testament to the people that kind of surround and shape Moses too. Like Shipra and Puah, remember, from his birth. Okay, chapter 19, would someone like to read from a different translation? And would just go to verse 1 to 15. Anyone on Zoom, maybe? Got a book?
I will.
Oh,
I've got my glasses back and I can read.
oh, great, Mary. Thank you. Which book are you reading from?
The women's CEB Women's Bible.
Perfect. Yeah, the translation is CEB, Common English Bible from 2015, I
okay.
think. Yep, that's great. All right, so just read 1 to 15 if you wouldn't mind.
Okay.
Chapter 19.
On exactly the 3rd month anniversary of the Israelites leaving the land of Egypt, they came into the Sinai desert. They traveled from Rephidim, came into the Sinai desert, and set up camp there. Israel camped there in front of the mountain, while Moses went up to the Lord, went up to God. The Lord called to him from the mountain, "This is what you should say to Jacob's household and declare to the Israelites. You saw what I did to the Egyptians and how I lifted you up on eagle's wings and brought you to me. So now, if you faithfully obey me and stay true to my covenant, you will be my most precious possession out of all the peoples, since the whole earth belongs to me. You will be a kingdom of priests for me and a holy nation. These are the words you should say to the Israelites." So Moses came down, called together the people's elders, and set before them all these words that the Lord had commanded him. The people all responded with one voice, "Everything that the Lord has said, we will do." Moses reported to the Lord what the people said. Then the Lord said to Moses, "I'm about to come to you in a thick cloud in order that the people will hear me talking with you so that they will always trust you." Moses told the Lord what the people said. And the Lord said to Moses, "Go to the people and take today and tomorrow to make them holy. Have them wash their clothes. Be ready for the 3rd day, because on the 3rd day, the Lord will come down on Mount Sinai for all the people to see. Set up a fence for the people all around and tell them, be careful not to go up the mountain or to touch any part of it. Anyone who even touches the mountain must be put to death. No one should touch anyone who has touched it, or they must be either stoned to death or shot with arrows. Whether an animal or a human being, they must not be allowed to live. Only when the ram's horn sounds may they go up on the mountain." So Moses went down the mountain to the people. He made sure the people were holy and that they washed their clothes. He told them, "Prepare yourselves for 3 days. Don't go near a woman."
Have a stop. Yes.
Hmm.
Heaven forbid you let a woman get near you. Right. Fascinating stuff. And it's a preparatory. Again, I can't help but think of this musically, but there's a big movement coming. And so this is kind of an orchestral preparation. So you've got some instructions coming from God, and they're very, very detailed, which they're so detailed that should be a clue to you that this is probably something that was in practice in the Israelite community at the time of the writing of this, and probably for many centuries before. So it was so important that they had to get all of this stuff down, and it was all these things about shall be put to death, shall be put to death. I'm not trying to negate them. I'm just saying this was things they would have heard over and over and over again. Do not touch the cookie jar or I will put you to death. That kind of like that. So it's many ways that's just all incorporated in here. The 3rd day stuff, it's not critical, these numbers. It's just 3 days is supposed to be a long time. Because remember, everybody's walking, so it would have felt like.
Yeah, it's usually preparation only takes 2 days, but in this
Exactly.
particular instance, because of what's happening, it takes 3 days. It's an additional exclamation point about what's going to happen.
Right.
And of course, the whole thing about the woman, that's a euphemism, and it literally means, not to have sex with a woman, and that's often preparation for, when you're going to be involved in particularly. I don't know. It's just, the question is whether the women were even part of this, the whole thing, because they were considered to be, I don't know, anyway.
Yeah, no, I know. I'm
Just
sure.
weird cultural stuff.
Yeah, I'm sure as all this is happening, the women are in a tent somewhere going like, whatever. Yeah. All right, let's keep going. Would someone like to finish the chapter 16 to 25? I'm trying to get us to the 10 Commandments.
I could do it from
Okay.
Message.
Okay, Barb's reading from the Message. Thank you.
On the third day at daybreak, there were loud claps of thunder, flashes of lightning, a thick cloud covering the mountain, and an ear-piercing trumpet blast. Everyone in the camp shuddered in fear. Moses led the people out of the camp to meet God. They stood at attention at the base of the mountain. Mount Sinai was all smoke because God had come down on it as fire. Smoke poured from it like smoke from a furnace. The whole mountain shuddered in huge spasms. The trumpet blast grew louder and louder. Moses spoke and God answered. Thunder. God descended to the peak of Mount Sinai. God called Moses up to the peak and Moses climbed up. God said to Moses, "Go down, warn the people not to break through the barricades to get a look at God, lest many of them die. And the priest also warned them to prepare themselves for the holy meeting, lest God break out against them." Moses said to God, "But the people can't climb Mount Sinai. You've already warned us well, telling us, post boundaries around the mountain, respect the holy mountain." God told him, "Go down and then bring Aaron back up with you. But make sure that the priests and the people don't break through and come up to God, lest he break out against them." So Moses went down to the people. He said to them, "God spoke all these words. I am God, your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of a life of slavery. No other gods, only me." Did you want me to go this far?
You can stop right there, actually, but it did kind of flow into it, so that's perfect. It is all one thought. No, thank you, Barb. That's great. And while I know there's clergy everywhere who can resonate with this feeling like we've got a head start to get to God, God's going, not even the priests can jump the line here. So keep those guys down there. Can you just imagine all these clergy going like, "Oh, I thought we were first." No. No, I want Moses. Sorry, but what would you say is maybe the most important, I don't know, part or phrase or anything in that whole passage? I'm curious. Why all of this? Before we get to the first commandment, why? What might be a takeaway from all of this?
I would say like a picture of the power of God and the it's a big picture that's being given to them of how serious this is. And yeah,
That's right. It's boiled down to I think the line in verse 23, set limits around the mountain and keep it holy. And that is God reminding Moses reminding God what God had already said, and that we are creating a mystique, or maybe returning to a mystique about God, that God is so beyond us that God only approaches in this really supernatural way, thunder, lightning, a cloud on a mountain, that people can see it, but they can't access it. So this really echoes that Raiders of the Lost Ark kind of theme too, that there's only so much you can get of God. And where have we heard that before? That's right from Genesis 2, in that garden of good and evil, of just there are limits. We don't necessarily know why there are limits, but we attribute them to God, but we can't get to God as much as we try. Not yet, at least. We can't have access to it. Not even the clergy have that kind of access to God, I think. But you're right, Mary. It adds to I say mystique, but this kind of awe-inspiring aspect to God, and again, preparatory. God is saying, before we do this thing, I mean, this is how holy this is. We need to kind of set some parameters here. Barb, do you mind reading? I'd love to hear the 10 Commandments in the Message. So why don't you knock out the 10 Commandments? And I think the last verse is 21.
Okay.
Kind of finishes the thought. Yep.
God spoke all these words. I am God, your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of a life of slavery. No other gods, only me. No carved gods of any size, shape, or form, or anything whatever, whether of things that fly or walk or swim. Don't bow down to them and don't serve them, because I am God, your God, and I'm a most jealous God, punishing the children for any sins their parents pass on to them to the third, and yes, even to the fourth generation of those who hate me. But I'm unswervingly loyal to the thousands who love me and keep my commandments. No using the name of God, your God, in curses or silly banter. God won't put up with the irreverent use of his name. Observe the Sabbath day to keep it holy. Work six days and do everything you need to do. But the seventh day is a Sabbath to God, your God. Don't do any work, not you, nor your son, nor your daughter, nor your servant, nor your maid, nor your animals, not even the foreign guest visiting in your town. For in 6 days God made heaven, earth, and the sea, and everything in them. He rested on the seventh day. Therefore God blessed the Sabbath day. He set it apart as a holy day. Honor your father and mother, so that you'll live a long time in the land that God, your God, is giving you. No murder, no adultery, no stealing, no lies about your neighbor, no lusting after your neighbor's house or wife or servant or maid or ox or donkey. Don't set your heart on anything that is your neighbor's. All the people experiencing the thunder and lightning, the trumpet blast, and the smoking mountain were afraid. They pulled back and stood at a distance. They said to Moses, you speak to us and we'll listen, but don't have God speak to us or we'll die. Moses spoke, don't be afraid. God has come to test you and instill a deep and reverent awe within you so that you won't sin. The people kept their distance while Moses approached the thick cloud where God was. God said to Moses, give this message to the people of Israel. You've experienced firsthand how I spoke with you from heaven. Don't make gods of silver and gods of gold and then set them alongside me. Make me an earthen altar. Sacrifice your whole burnt offerings, your peace offerings, your sheep and your cattle on it. Every place where I cause my name to be honored is your worship. I'll be there myself and bless you. If you use stones to make my altar, don't use dressed stone. If you use a chisel on the stones, you'll profane the altar. Don't use steps to climb to my altar, because that will expose your nakedness.
All right. Woo.
Wow.
So remembering the traditions, I wish I had my book on me. I'm just guessing. David, you might be able to check us on it. JEDP, all of those are different sources. I would venture to say the P source has a lot to do with this. That's the priestly source, because this reeks of, and if not, it's probably derived from other sources, but you can see how it has a lot to do with how you behave kind of in worship in many ways, or that it kind of got translated back into the book. So all of these details sounds a little bit like Father O'Donoghue telling, little Jimmy, about how to be an altar boy a little bit. Don't you dare turn your back on the altar without referencing. And that kind of gets written back in. Are we right, David, or am I way off?
Your second guess was right. It's not from any of the major sources, they believe. It's from other sources with a little bits of the redactor thrown in to introduce. And so it's not from any of the major four sources. At least that's what Friedman believes. That's how
that makes sense, because this is as old, this tradition of these commandments is probably as old as those songs, the Song of Miriam, the Song of Moses. They are the source from which really this book sprung from, and they were already in existence. People could repeat these probably by memory by the time before this was written in worship. But so yeah, it's probably an amalgam of really things, but I'd be shocked if priests didn't have a hand in it. Especially even the part before where we talked about them not being able to approach the Lord. They were probably some people wondering why priests don't talk to God directly. Still wonder that. And it's sorry. Okay. Then God launches into the commandments, which I think it's important to say, at least as the text is before us, none of this is God talking to us. Let's again put aside that it's the literal take on this, but as I'm talking textually criticism or narrative criticism here. This is all Moses saying what God told him. I'm not throwing Moses under the bus here. Let me be clear. I'm just saying, maybe God had more brevity to what he said, and maybe Moses and therefore others, maybe Aaron, maybe countless others added and embellished beyond it, right? I'm not saying Moses made up these. I'm not saying Moses added 2 or 3 that he thought were important. But it's there in the text right before your very eyes that it's not really the Lord speaking to us, because we've established over and over again that only Moses can talk to God, to the point where the people said, "Don't let God talk to us because we'll die." I personally take a lot of comfort in that, because again, I'm reminded of the humanity of this, that this is telling us as much as it is about the people, the Israelites, now generations later interpreting how they feel about God, than it is about God literally writing words down in stone, pun intended, for us to follow word for word. Reason I'm saying is obviously there's some governing principles here for any society, which must be taken into account. Most importantly, verse 13: "You shall not murder." That's pretty much universally agreed upon by all civilizations now, that that's not a good thing, and that stealing is not good. But after murder, these things start to fall into stuff that people, and honestly, at the time, I'm sure murder was happening all the time. Ruth, just killing people when you got up. Think of Cain and Abel in Genesis. Why that was so easy to happen. It wasn't just to make a point. It's just because they just saw murder all the time. They are trying to create a society here that where they do not have an experience of everything that they see around them, which is people worshiping other gods, people not acknowledging God as the God, people killing each other, people trashing their parents, people lying, people stealing. You see what I'm saying? So this is Israel, not so much ancient Israel, not so much saying this is what God said, but this is what our God wants of us, to distinguish and make us different than all the chaos happening around us. In many ways, it's like ordering light out of darkness for them, because of course all human beings fail at these to some degree. I think hopefully all of us have not failed at verse 13, but a lot of us fail at a lot of these, and sometimes regularly. So let me stop there, and I want to hear what you all think, having read all this. And anyone who hasn't spoken, Anne or Leslie, Pam, if anybody has any thoughts, not to put you on the spot. If you don't have thoughts, that's okay. Barb, also, would you reread the verse? Is it verse 20? Moses said to the people, "Do not be afraid." Yeah, your translation had a beautiful way. This is Eugene Peterson's The Message. When you get to that word fear, almost every time I come upon it and I'm reading, I have to stop and give you a different translation for it, because fear is not to be confused with God speaks to us and we're going to die. It's not that kind of fear, although that's what they're talking about. Yeah. Fear is about humility or reverence. So go ahead and read that again.
So Moses spoke to the people, "Don't be afraid. God has come to test you and instill a deep and reverent awe within you so that you won't sin."
Exactly. Which is also a great window or kind of avenue into talking about sin, which is, it has something to do with a respect of God. Going all the way back to Genesis, that it has something to do with you've lost your reverence and respect for God somehow, and that's what the sin is, as opposed to, I took a cookie and didn't, I shouldn't have had a cookie. You see the difference? How some people pick on the littlest things as sins and whatnot, whereas it's like, and then you can say, how about the things that people say are grievous sins, like homosexuality, and you go, how is that disrespectful or irreverent to God based on these parameters? That's what I would say, at least. So
It's an interesting addition to the really strict rules that have just been said. Right. I'm wondering, is that like a different source, or that's very different and hopeful?
Yeah, it's mostly, it may not be a different source, I don't know, but that it's what that translator of the one that Barb is reading from, the message, it's what he was going for, which was to try to get back to the original Hebrew word and look at and remember a lot of these words, not all of them, but a lot of them have multiple meanings, and they get translated into one language and then to another and then to another and then to English, which is so finite because we have very few words that have multiple meanings in print. So the word fear means for us scared, usually, when really it means awe and reverence, when we're talking about fear of God. The being afraid of God is not a part of it. So that, that's maybe like tiny part of it. It's okay to be afraid of God, like I'm afraid of thunderstorms or flying in a plane, and all of those things rely on me to depend on God. Then in many ways I'm afraid of, like, I don't really know what's going to happen. That you see the same kind of thing. But especially when we're talking about ways to behave in a society and how not to sin, when you put it in the context of I just don't want to get God's wrath, that's not really the point of it. Is really you don't want to disrespect or disappoint. And that's
one of the things to kind of recap what Exodus is all about. One of the things is that there are two purposes of Exodus. One was how to conduct themselves as God's chosen people, and the other one is how to get on, or to how to worship God, and what kind of worship God demands. And those are the two. I believe that and that's kind of the summation of the 10 Commandments. The first part is about how to worship God and how to do it. And then the following part, the last ones are how to conduct themselves as God's chosen people. And that means they need to be set apart from the rest of the rest of the world and how the others worship their gods.
Yes.
I would think that fundamentalists who take everything literally would be in a quandary now because of the political situation. I mean, they take the Old Testament literally too, don't they?
Yeah. It's a I don't know. I would be exhausted to try to defend all of this literally. I would be absolutely exhausted, even if I was raised in the tradition. It's very tiring, I would imagine. Yeah.
Sorry. I had a question.
Yes.
I guess I forgot or maybe wasn't paying attention, but I don't have the message, and it is where it counts, it is really different from mine. I have the Christian Standard Bible, the Study Bible for Women, and in this passage, the word fear is used a lot, whereas when Barb was reading the message, it was, I forgot the word it was used. It was awe. You said awe.
Right. Awe.
What does the message say again about in the fourth line where it says, in mine it says that that I am a jealous God and I'll punish the children for the father's iniquities to the third and fourth generations.
Yeah, good question. What did it
And
say?
so what does yours say, Barb?
It was pretty fair to that.
Yeah, yeah. I am God, your God, and I'm a most jealous God, punishing the children for any sins their parents pass on to them, to the third, and yes, even to the fourth generation of those who hate.
So what do you have to say about that, Greg?
That's all, that has to do with intergenerational sin.
Can you
And,
explain that away, Greg?
I can't explain it away. David's got a good. David, help me out. Yeah, what were you saying?
No, it's just, it was a belief at that time that there was such a thing as intergenerational sin. And to a certain degree, you can understand it, that if the fathers and the grandfathers were involved in some kind of bad behaviors, and they of course taught them to their children, there would be consequences down throughout generations. And this is more strongly supported in some other versions of the Ten Commandments, but in this one, at least it says in verse 6, but showing kindness to the thousandth generation of those who love me and keep my commandments. And that's kind of an escape clause, maybe the fact that, all right, if your fathers did this, there are going to be consequences, but if you turn and you do it somewhat differently, then that, God is still loving. But this is a theme throughout the Old Testament, at least portions of it, the fact that people are held accountable for the things their fathers and grandfathers did, until the prophetic tradition, where that seems to be kind of ameliorated, where you're mostly responsible just for what you do. It's there, and it's a different way of understanding God. It's a different way of understanding the impact of sin, of living wrongly.
Yes, beautifully said. And I would add that this is where my professor's dialogical approach to the Bible helps immensely, because the second you're confronted with something difficult like that, it really is a good instinct to then say, well, what do others say in the Bible about it? And sure enough, in the footnotes, as David's addressing, the prophets don't agree with that. So later writers reflecting on Exodus, because there are several books in the Bible that are reflecting on earlier books in the Bible, they take issue with it. They debate that. So that's one thing. But I also would say, I think it's tangent to what David's saying, that there is already an experience of a feeling that things that grandfathers or grandmothers or fathers have done are still we're still being punished for things that are beyond us. And now that feeling has made it into, please don't do that. For future generations. Can we stop with if you do this, then God's punishing us. Remember, this is how I kind of interpret early primeval, like how they deal with weather phenomenon. Clearly we've done something wrong. God is punishing us. Clearly God's punishing, I didn't do anything wrong. So clearly God's punishing me because of something my father did. And then that becomes part of your tradition, part of your, just part of the psychosis in many ways. I don't mean negative way. I don't mean that in a negative.
I would just say that I would just relate it to the United States and the concept of slavery.
Yes.
That we're still suffering the consequences
Right.
of slavery. So in a certain respect, anyway.
Yeah, especially people grappling with the ones that have to pay, institutions that are thinking about paying reparations. And I know that that's thorny for some people. Why would you pay somebody? Well, it's like somebody has to pay, So
In the present, I'm sorry, in the present day, do present day Jews, is it just Orthodox Jews that might look at this one way, and then others? I'm just curious about where that occurs in present day Judaism.
I can't say for sure, but there is a debate within, because there's always a debate within Judaism. Well, at the first step of it, there's really two wings. There's the Orthodox and there's Reform. And Reform tends to be more quote unquote liberal, but it's in both forms of Judaism that they have midrash, and they have the invitation to debate and talk and have a dialogue about scripture. And that's evidenced in the assembly of books in the Old Testament that are likely prophets who were reflecting and commenting and pushing back on things from Exodus or Genesis and all. It's part of their tradition to debate and argue. It's less a part of the Christian tradition because we've been so hierarchical for more than 1800 years. You know, it's always been Pope, tell us what to think. Sorry, I don't mean to dumb it down like that. But it's not to say that these aren't important. Please don't get me wrong. You know, that there might not be a feeling of the sins of the father being revisited on the son and all, because that does happen. They're just trying to create a parameter around how to build a society where that doesn't happen, and that's the kind of Israel we want to be. Whether or not they get there, that sounds like a perfect cliffhanger for next week, because we're about to enter into a period of several chapters where God continues talking, presumably, and goes on and on and on beyond he hit us with the whammy with these commandments, but there's a lot more details in there that will be fun to talk about for sure, and debate before God gets to I thought probably a moment you're all waiting for, which is the golden calf. If you haven't heard that in a while, and because these aren't the last 10 commandments. Let's put it that way. Yeah. And on that happy note, we got to run. Thank you, everybody. This was great. Great discussion as always. And we'll see you next week. Remember, you can come in person or you can be on Zoom, either way.
All right, thank you.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Take care, everyone. Have a great day.
Bye.
Is there a noonday prayer today?
Yes, I'm going to switch over to Facebook in about 5 minutes. I'll see you over there, Mary.
Okay,
Take care.
bye.